Ladies and gentlemen, and anyone not covered under those categories, welcome to the third and final installment of How to Paint Your Guitar by Hand. Hopefully this is the final installment. We're almost done. So guys, we're on to the polishing stage now. This is where the magic happens. Please don't message me and tell me where else the magic happens. Or do, you know. So at this stage in the project, you're going to look at your gloss clear coat, and if you're anything like me, you're going to think, oh, that's shiny, but it's not perfect. It's not quite what you were hoping for. And that's why we do the polishing. So let's take a bit of a closer look at this thing now. You can see we've got a pretty good gloss on there. Haven't done anything to it yet, just applied it, which I'm hoping you've seen already. If you haven't, I did a video on that, oddly enough. This is a series. Anyway, so we've got a decent gloss there, but today we're gonna flatten that out and make sure that it's, well, better than decent. And then on the back and sides, we've got our satin. Now, the satin, if you look at it, satin's a little easier to do than gloss. I'm sure everybody kind of realized that. The satin looks pretty much perfect, I'll be honest with you, as cocky as that sounds. So if you're doing your satin finish and it comes out awesome, don't polish it. There's no reason to mess with it. I'm going to, so that I can show you how to do it in case you need to. But yeah, if it looks good, don't mess with it. And at the same time, if you get a far better gloss than this, don't mess with it. Leave well enough alone. Well, you don't need to leave well enough alone, but leave excellent alone. All right, so what we're going to be using for this one, for the satin, which I'm going to do second because I want to, we're going to be using Min Wax Paste Finishing Wax. Just figured I'd teleport up here and give you a better look. Paste Finishing Wax. It's in a yellow container, like pretty much all the Min Wax stuff we've been using. And who would have guessed, some 4-0 or quadruple aught or whatever steel wool. We're going to use this to rub out our finish with the paste wax. Now for the gloss side, I could not find a compound that I wanted to use at Home Depot. So I got mine from Canadian Tire. Now you can use pretty much any automotive finishing compound and polish. You can use New Finish, you can use Mother's, whatever. Turtle wax even. I shouldn't have made that sound like a secondary thing. Turtle wax is fine. I'm going to be using meguiars. So if you're in the United States, which I know many of you are, you can go to, for example, I think there's a store called AutoZone or Napa or something like that, and pick yourself up some automotive polish. If you can get 3M or something like that, excellent. That's what you're looking for. I'm going to be using Meguiar's Ultimate Compound and Meguiar's Ultimate Polish because Meguiar's loves to overuse the word ultimate. Now for the satin, you're going to be doing everything at once. You're rubbing out the finish. So you're going to do your sanding, which isn't really sanding, and you're adding your polish, which is the paste wax, all in one step. For the gloss, that's not the case. You're going to want to sand it and then polish it. So there are a number of ways to do that. Ideally, you would go through it with sandpaper, starting at about 1,000 grit and working your way up to literally the highest you can get. I go up to 5,000 typically. I know 5,000 grit and basically anything over 1,200 can be extremely hard to find. So that has the benefit of flattening and like flattening your finish out with the original lower grits and then smoothing it out to the point that it's easy to polish. If you can't go up to at least 1,000 or 1,500, you're going to have a difficult time polishing. You have other options as well. I'm actually going to stick with the stuff that we've been using for the most part and do mine with the steel wool. Now steel wool has a drawback to it. It's easy to get and it's easy to use, but it doesn't have any flattening features. I don't know what you would say there. It doesn't flatten the finish at all. So if your finish is very bumpy, steel wool is not going to be a great option for you. Mine's nice and smooth, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. If you need to get the best of both worlds and you can't get a high enough grit sandpaper, take the highest one you can find, 800, 600, whatever you can get, and lightly sand it flat. Use a sanding block or something like that to keep it flat, and then go over it with your very fine steel wool to lighten up the scratches so that you can polish it more easily. So, we're going to get started with this gloss side. Don't mix your paint in your coffee cup, guys. There's no way to get that taste out after. I gotta go get a new coffee cup. Anyway, we're gonna start with the gloss side, and yeah, the first step is to simply sand this down. Now, when you do that, it's not gonna look glossy anymore. Trust me, okay? Don't panic. You wanna make sure that you get it all scuffed down so that it looks nice and dull. As odd as that seems for gloss. Gotta dull out the entire finish. I recommend doing this all in the same direction if you can. You don't do a swirling pattern. You're not trying to rub something in to it. You're just trying to make it as smooth as possible. And the best way to do that, with wood you want to follow the grain. With a finish it's not a big deal. But I personally think that the way that scratches work, you don't overlap them and screw them up as much if you go all in the same direction. Alright guys, so now that I've given myself a nice reminder of why I invested in an orbital sander, the gloss is basically gone, and by basically I mean completely. It's still pretty shiny because it's sanded very smooth, but it's not glossy. It basically looks like the satin does at this point. Funny how that works, eh? Did I just I'm Canadian, by the way. Anyway. Now I'm going to take the compound to it and basically do the same motion. So if my arm wasn't sore from this, it will be. And then I'll be doing the same with the polish. So in the meguiars system, and most of them, compound goes first because it's more aggressive, it takes out the scratches, and then polish finishes it off. Alright, so I'm going to start with the compound. Give it a good shake. I'm going to be using a cotton rag, much like the one that I used to apply that final coat of poly. And you're basically just going to go into this one. You do go in a circular motion because you want to hit those scratches from all angles and try and burn them out. And pretty much what you're going to do is just rub this thing as aggressively as you can. Leave that one alone, please. Anyway, you don't need a ton of the compound, but it doesn't hurt to have extra because you're going to wipe away the excess when you're done. So get some on there. You see how much I've got on there? Kind of. Begin by spreading it around a little. You kind of want to have the whole area that you're rubbing out coated in it. So if you didn't put it on enough to spread it out pretty much over the entire area and have a thin layer on there, then add a little bit more. Then what you do is apply, well, with a polisher you would apply medium pressure. So if you have one of those, you don't really have to push on it too hard. But by hand, you're going to push pretty much as hard as you can and rub it around as fast as you can, because what you're trying to do is basically burn this stuff in. So get in there nice and aggressively, work in circles, my table's shaking, and try and really burn that stuff in. And you can do this 2 or 3 times. You'll probably notice that it takes you more than once to really get it up to a nice shine. It should look pretty well polished before you move on to the polish. So don't think that you can do this once and be like, oh, well, you know, it's kind of shiny, and then move on to the polish. You really want to try and pretty much polish it out with the compound beforehand. And when you've done a pass, wipe off the excess and move on to the next one. So now I've finished a couple passes of the compound. You can see this is starting to get quite smooth and shiny, very reflective. I've also smashed my coffee cup in other news. Anyway, now it's time for me to move on to the polish. So believe it or not, the polish uses the exact same technique. You're going to want to grab yourself a fresh rag, shake it up, put some on, and burn it in. Spread it around first and just go to town on it. You'll notice that the polish is a little thinner. It's not quite as viscous as the compound, so be aware of that when you're putting it on. And aside from that, you know what to do. Alright guys, so here it is. Nice and shiny. That's with 2 passes of the polish. Now if you really take the time and effort and go up with a really high grit of sandpaper and get it sanded nice and smooth, and then take your time with the polishing, do 2 or 3 passes with your compound, 2 or 3 passes with your polish, you can achieve a fantastic gloss, and you don't need any kind of specialty equipment. So like I said in my previous video, there's no reason to be daunted by the gloss finish. It is a little more difficult, but if you put in the time and effort, there's no reason why you can't achieve a very nice finish. Alright, so let's call that a wrap on the gloss and move on to the satin. Now, the satin, as I'm sure you can imagine, is a little easier to work with in this case. It doesn't show imperfections quite like the gloss does, and it can be done all in one step. So, I showed you the paste finishing wax that I'm going to be using. I've got my 4.0 steel wool. Make sure you're getting a fine steel wool when you go to do this. Don't use like 2.0 or, God forbid, like something that's not a bunch of zeros. Get the finest stuff you can find. All I'm going to do is load it up with some of the wax, almost like if anybody out there wet shaves. It's kind of like lathering up your badger brush in your shaving soap or whatever it is you happen to use. I know that sounds weird coming from a guy with a beard, but anyway, load that up with the wax, and again in circular motions. You're just going to rub the wax into the entire surface. Now you can push fairly hard with this. You are kind of burning it in a way, and sanding at the same time to make sure that you're smoothing it all out. There are other uses for this paste finishing wax, but this is one of my favorites. I don't personally like it that much as an actual finish, but I find that it works well for rubbing out a finish. For example, a lacquer or a satin poly. As was the case before, when you're finished, you're going to want to wipe away the excess wax. Now it's not going to really look like there's a bunch of excess on there, but this part with your cloth or your shop towel or whatever you happen to be using is quite important. You want to push hard and use kind of the same technique that you used for rubbing out the finish before. And that's almost going to, I don't know what the word is, burnish it. That's kind of going to polish up that wax finish, almost like buffing the wax off of your car. Hopefully everybody's done that, if you have a car. And that's what's going to give you that final finish that you're looking for. So you can go through that step a couple times if you need to. And that's what's going to give you that nice hand rub satin finish. Nice and flat, and I don't mean in terms of sheen, I mean like level, but relatively flat in terms of sheen as well. Alright guys, so bear in mind if you for some reason were to switch those polishing processes using this, you could rub out your gloss to a satin finish. It would take a little work. You'd want to scuff it first and then do that, but it would still work. And vice versa, if you really wanted to, you could sand your You could sand your satin finish very smooth and take your polish to it. I keep looking over there because that's where my polish is sitting, sorry. Take your polish to it and you could actually get a quite high gloss out of that. So that concludes our series about how to finish your guitar by hand. I might do another of this nature with a different kind of paint or a different finishing process. But for the interim, that's what we've got. So if you haven't already, please check out my channel. I got a bunch of other painting tutorials, wood finishing tips, and things of that nature that people watching this video will most likely be interested in. And also, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, I'd love it if you would subscribe to my channel. The more people I get, the more views I get, the more I can afford to do stuff like this. As you've probably noticed, my channel is monetized, and the money that I get from Google, which believe me isn't much, goes into the materials and things like that that I need to continue making these videos. So with all my propaganda nonsense out of the way, thanks a lot for watching. I hope this was helpful. See you next time.